Hello everyone, I'm Flick. You probably don't know me, and that isn't important right now. With the new direction I hope to take my channel going forwards, which is leaning more into the video essay side of reviews that focus primarily on the story of video games, I felt that I should go back to the near past and pick a game about which I had some strong feelings about that I'd like to share and discuss with you. The game I've chosen is Marvel Spider-Man 2, developed by Insomniac Games and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. Much like before, my main focus will be on a critique of the story, but I also hope to touch on gameplay because it's especially important here that one of the main issues I have with this game is that there's very few moments that make you feel like you're playing as a superhero, and this ruins aspects of both gameplay and story. Before we go on, I'll quickly mention that not only will this video contain full spoilers for Spider-Man 2, but we'll also dip into the first game and the Miles Morales spin-off game as well. You have been warned. For my Suicide Squad video, I worked on the basis that okay, you're pretending this is in the Arkham universe, so I'll measure the story up against that statement and see how true it holds. Not very, as it turns out. Here I feel the important point for Spider-Man 2 to work from is, who is this game for? Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Who is something for is an important question. It doesn't mean that something that's not meant for you can't be enjoyed by you. For instance, I don't really think the Frog Detective games were made for an old-ass man like myself, yet I still enjoyed playing them, they're adorable. But the target audience is something to be considered when a multi-million-dollar budget game is being created. Can we get some hints from the back of the box? No. How about Insomniac's own website? No. How about Sony's website? Not really? They don't even mention Kraven, weirdly. What are these descriptions? They confirm that you swing, jump, and can use web wings. That's really it. I suppose they do say it's a sequel, so that's a start. Just off the top of my head, how about Be Spider-Man in an action-packed superhero adventure game set in an expansive New York setting that sees Miles Morales struggle with his desire for revenge and Peter Parker faces the dark temptation of otherworldly power, while the deadly Kraven the Hunter descends on the city looking for a suitable challenge. Not great, but better than briefly mentioning that this game is a sequel and then listing 3 movement options you have for getting around New York, surely? As we go through the key plot moments of Spider-Man 2 together, I want you to keep asking yourself in the back of your mind, who is this game for? The obvious thing you might go with this second is, people who liked Spider-Man 1 and or the Miles Morales standalone game. And that would make the most sense usually, but this game doesn't come across like that on closer inspection. At least not to me. I actually feel like there's a lot of confusing and disparate goals from the various creatives behind aspects of Spider-Man 2. One of the advantages of being a little late to the party with any kind of critique of this game is that the people behind it have already had time to do post-launch, spoiler-laden, candid interviews talking about all aspects of the story. Most of these interviews are carried out by the creative directors Brian Intihar and Bill Roseman, as well as narrative director Ben Arfman and advanced writer Brittany Morris. We'll dip into a few of these interview quotes as we go that I feel will help provide context for why things in the game are the way they are. With that all in mind, I'll reiterate again, keep asking yourself, who is this game for as we go? I'm curious if you'll come to the same conclusion I have by the time we make it to the end. Before we get stuck in though, a little history of my time with the series just for context. I enjoyed the first Spider-Man game that Insomniac brought to us. It gave me the experience I was expecting in a way that I enjoyed. They built off of the free-flow combat system pioneered by the Batman Arkham games. I got to play as Spider-Man, swinging around the city, helping people, stopping criminals, but then there was also the more personal plot involving his mentor, Doc Ock, turning bad, and then Mr. Negative infecting people, which ultimately led Peter to suffering a great personal loss with the death of Aunt May. The DLC for the first game was something I did not enjoy. It was mission after mission of wave after wave of the worst enemies in the game, followed by rushing through the story of Yuri Watanabe turning from good cop into murderous vigilante, and Peter and MJ became acquainted with Silver Sable. Hammerhead was the main villain of the DLC, I think. I had to go Google it to remind myself since he was that forgettable. I think he became some kind of robot at the end.
You serious?
Miles going through the loss of his father and then also getting his powers is set up through the first game, and then Peter would go on to become his mentor. While Peter and MJ go off on a month-long holiday to Symkaria, not holiday, it was so MJ could research her very, very important book. Miles gets left protecting the city on his own, which was the framing for his standalone game. The Miles Morales game didn't really feel standalone. It felt like DLC that was torn away and padded a little to turn it into something Sony could charge full price for. And as much as I love electric themed powers, I didn't like the Miles Morales Spider-Man game. The web swinging was fine, but the padding and the poor plot detracted too much from my overall enjoyment. The problems with where the series went began with that Miles game. The signs were there. While I liked Harlem rallying around their new Spider-Man to the point of protecting his identity in a scene that mimicked the second Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, everything else was lacking. The game does Miles bad, portraying him as a fool, a weakling, and someone who certainly doesn't feel like a superhero, or at least a hero in training. The game constantly forgets his stealth powers, or his shock abilities, not to mention his super strength or agility. There were only so many times I could suspend my disbelief that he was getting beaten up, and on one occasion almost beaten to death, by a normal little girl with rocket boots. In the finale of the game, Miles also kills the villain, albeit with her consent. Yes, that actually happens.
What?
She gives her consent for him to explode and kill her. That makes it okay. It was only in reminding myself of the plot of that Miles Morales game that I rediscovered just how terrible that finale was. But I had also totally forgotten that Miles is a murderer. He has taken a life. Yes, there were circumstances beyond his control, and yes, she said it was okay, and it was basically her fault, but he's been responsible for someone dying, and that actually matters more to Spider-Man 2 than I realised. I guess he got over it pretty quick though. I'm getting sidetracked. Man, that game was especially bad. The ending really annoyed me, but we aren't here to talk about that, so let's move on to some general thoughts about the gameplay of Spider-Man 2, and then from there, move on to the story.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
I don't know about you, but when I play a superhero game, I'd like to think that you would also expect that we get to play as a superhero. Spider-Man 2 did a very poor job creating this particular power fantasy via gameplay outside of two sections where at best you're actually an anti-hero, these being when Peter rages out with the symbiote or when you briefly get to play as Venom. Most of the rest of the time, at best, you're a vigilante. It doesn't feel like you have superpowers. I'm aware that part of the lore is that Peter pulls his punches so he doesn't irreparably hurt the criminals he beats up, but I'm not really talking about how many punches it takes him or Miles to defeat a normal man. I'm more talking about how a normal man, on normal difficulty, can kill either Spider-Man with roughly 3 to 4 punches. I'm talking about how a man with a crowbar can withstand super strength blows hitting him. I'm talking about someone leaping through the air or doing some other striking attack that is apparently too fast for someone with super agility and precognition to dodge. The game confounds this cognitive dissonance further by the opening tutorial boss throwing Miles through a building at one point, which he just gets up from and bounces back into the fight.
Bang! Spider-Man, watch out! No, 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 no! You okay? I'm working on it! Thought I lost you there! Can't get rid of me that easy! Must be more of a Pilates guy. That was your idea?
How strong characters are in pre-scripted or cutscene moments are utterly at odds with how strong they feel in minute-to-minute normal gameplay. I couldn't find anywhere else to include this in the critiques, so I'm coming in here to mention that Yuri Watanabe turns up again as the vigilante Wraith. This former police officer, now armed with throwing stars and a sickle and chain, is now not only able to hold her own against Spider-Man, but is quite capable of killing him in an overlong 3-phase boss fight. It's awful, plain and simple. I hated every moment of it, which is a shame because the story beats of those side missions involving her are actually pretty okay. Anyway, back to the thing. These are all problems the first Spider-Man game had too, but they introduce these enemies that exist to force certain combat mechanics on you slower as the game goes on. In Spider-Man 2, almost instantly you're journeying in, enemy you must aerial attack or you can't hurt them, enemy you must parry or you can't hurt them, enemy that you must dodge behind before you can hurt them, enemy that nullifies your abilities until you can defeat them, enemy that stays at range to harass you while you fight all those other problems. And these different enemies mix and match, drowning you in HUD elements you need to keep track of while fighting to make sure you do the one thing you're allowed to do that counters the one thing attacking you at that specific moment. Hope you weren't mid-dodge while an enemy does an undodgeable parry-only leap attack, or that's some damage you literally can't avoid. There is a difference between a superhero and a vigilante, and it's usually the scope of the threat they face and the tool set they use to face it. I shouldn't be feeling more like a superhero in Arkham Knight than I do in Spider-Man 2. That tells me something's wrong with the balance. Like, I just can't get over how soft Peter and Miles are. Why on normal difficulty do they die so easily? It honestly feels like a bug. If it is a bug, it would be one of many. This game did not spend enough time in the oven. It seems to me like it needed a lot more time not only for smoothing out visual bugs and gameplay hiccups, but in terms of reworking the pacing of the plot and the very obvious decline in quality of the third act. Via a quote from Brian Intihar, we can see that Sony had concerns of a similar nature, specifically that the team wouldn't be able to meet the expected quality standards. If Sony is worried about quality, you know something is very wrong. I should also mention that I know someone who worked on the QA for this game. They're a friend that I've known for years. I don't doubt for a second that they and their team worked hard to get this game into shape for Insomniac. But from the number of oddities, bugs and other general roughness that I experienced on my playthrough of the game, it became obvious that it needed more time, and I think Sony realised this as well. They still released it though, so they aren't blameless, and as a result we got it in the state that we did. That's enough about general gameplay though. I found it annoying, overcomplicated and honestly bland by the end. I only felt like I had superpowers and quick time events and the two previously mentioned sections, and rarely did it seem like the game cared that it wasn't providing the experience you would expect. That gives us a perfect jumping off point though, as we turn to the story.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
In a story, there's a simple concept of action and consequence. Something a character says or does influences the outcome of the situation or plot. In a video game, not literally every scene needs to forward the main story in some way, but it does need to forward the self-contained side story or moment that it's a part of. Spider-Man 2 largely ignores this premise, instead choosing to meander on pointless asides, trivial events and desperate virtue signalling. This could be excusable if the main story of the game had more to say, but it feels like the Kraven story is dragged a bit thin, then the Venom story is desperately squished into the final 1 or 2 hours. For every forgettable and, largely optional side quest I found, I couldn't help thinking that the main story probably suffered as a consequence of making time for these things. If I told you there'd be multiple moments in the game where you fly a drone in VR to shoot VR bees or rats or whatever the hell, would you believe me? How about slowly walking around town spraying graffiti? How about pedaling a bike from one location to another? How about taking photos? How about a DNA matching minigame that the developers clearly love since you'll do it at least 6 times? How about a section where you go absolutely ham on a whole compound of Kraven's highly skilled murderous hunters one-shotting every single one of them? Wait, hang on, that last one sounded kinda cool. Who gets to do that, Miles or Peter? The answer is neither! It's Mary Jane that gets to do that, but much more on her later.
What?
Not to go back to gameplay too much, but aren't these side activities supposed to be fun in games like this? There are some that involve fighting and they have semi-interesting mini plotlines such as finding Sandman's scattered memories or stolen musical instruments from a museum. Sure, fine. I also enjoyed the side mission that essentially just boiled down to finding a lost old man in a park and ends with Spider-Man talking with him about his dead wife on a park bench. Spider-Man is a street level hero. He's your friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man after all. And a moment like this is a nice reminder that being a hero doesn't just mean saving the world from a global threat. It would have been nice if the game had remembered this for the final act, but we'll get to that. Helping to find a lost old man is nice, but not being out there as a superhero stopping crimes so you could help school kids with prom night was just horrible. While doing those missions as Miles, all I could think of was, I wonder how many people he could have saved out in the city from crimes, but he's wasting his time and my time by doing this. One of the creative directors is exceptionally proud of the missions where Miles helps with prom night. I'm not really sure why. What's that? Because Miles is helping a gay couple? No, it can't be that he's proud of it for those reasons, because those missions were removed from the version of the game that was released in certain regions of the world that frown on homosexuality. If this questline meant so much to him, he'd surely fight to have them remain untouched, right? Preserve his artistic freedom to express his beliefs that he really truly believes in and wants to support? Huh. It can't just be because he wanted Western journalists to see gay representation, right? Right? The consequence of his actions here lead me to believe that he might be full of shit. The main plot is bogged down by these utterly bizarre side activities and fairly pointless side quests. Why does a Spider-Man game have a mission where you play as Miles' girlfriend while she commits crime? Graffiti is a crime in America, right? In terms of momentum, that's like having a mission pop up where you play as MJ as she does her taxes. Anyway, compare those kind of activities where you have a somber, reflective moment like with the old man on the bench to say Peter randomly solving world hunger via an iPad minigame, and you're just like...
What?
The consequence of this bizarre mishmash of different, disparate themes is that I really find them at odds with the story that is meant to be being told. I think the game wants to have a strong environmental angle mixed with teamwork, virtue signalling, and a passing of the torch, but then they also have to make room for the merciless hunter that's killing supervillains and the alien goo from outer space. Some of those things matter more to the creators of the game than others, and I think their actions speak louder than their words regarding which those things are, and the game itself has suffered as a consequence of these choices.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
We have Peter Parker and we have Miles Morales, who have both had their own games previously that fleshed out their stories and mixed them together as well, of course. But now they are both here together and working well as a team. In fact, the intro boss battle of Spider-Man 2 against Sandman shows just how much better they are at teamwork compared to messing up the Rhino prison transfer at the start of the Miles Morales game. So what do you do when you have these two heroes who already work well together and have both faced personal loss and come out the other side stronger? They need to go on a journey even if they end up at the same place at the end, so what can you do? You need an angle to work with. What did the developers do? The developers decided to retire one of them and give the other one Sith Lord powers.
You serious?
I'll go into more details about both of them in a moment. The introduction of the alien symbiote gives Peter and Miles something to argue about, something to drive them apart. That's a main plot point that's been done before, and it works. I will say though, Harry and Miles being jealous of each other for monopolising Peter's time felt incredibly forced. But Miles wanting to save Peter from the influence of the symbiote is an obvious point of conflict to work with. With that said, besides eventually saving Peter from the suit, there isn't really much more conflict between the two Spider-Men. They have their own things going on, and I think the game focused a bit too much on that rather than directly involving Miles with Peter's descent into losing control over the symbiote. Miles notices that Peter's acting differently, but then it's MJ and Harry who have to spell it out to him, and Miles only really comes back into the plot to beat Peter up until he rips the symbiote off. Did I even introduce Harry? Let's cover him in more detail later. Let's also skip past the tutorial boss fight against Sandman. I don't really have much more to say about it. It was a pretty cool opening fight. So we have Peter, who is still getting over Aunt May's death and is struggling to pay his bills. In an overlong opening mission where we walk around Aunt May's house, we get some flashbacks and then go on a bike ride with his newly recovered friend Harry, followed by more flashbacks and still sections in a school. We discover at the end of this that it was just a long setup for Harry to offer Peter a job. Prior to the alien symbiote arc, there really isn't much going on with Peter. In fact, he doesn't really do much Spider-Man stuff prior to getting the suit, unless you optionally pick him to be the one to play as for some of the side stuff. He gets fired from Miles' school on his first day in the intro mission, I guess, but that's really about it. I got the impression the writers were basically done with Peter pretty early on. He's had his game, he's had his story, now we're copying the 90s cartoon symbiote plot for this game. Let's just do that and then just get him out of here. I don't think I'd go so far as to call it contempt, but I did get the impression that they treat Peter with the same disinterest as Kraven does. Were Miles a more interesting character with more interesting things going on in his life, it would have been fine for Peter to be a more sidelined former protagonist. Peter's what, almost 30 in this universe? Yeah, his life's pretty much over. But no, instead we have the Miles arc being framed around him having to write a college introduction and is struggling to find anything to big himself up about that doesn't involve saying that, hey, I'm also Spider-Man. I don't know, Miles. How about saying that your highly respected cop father died in the line of duty and you strive to live up to his memory by approaching your education with the same dedication he approached his? Something like that. I'm sure colleges would eat that stuff up. I mentioned becoming a Sith Lord earlier. That's what happens to Miles. I guess to give him some kind of power up to keep him on par with fighting symbiotes? Early on during a prison transfer, wow, they really like prison transfer missions, don't they? Kraven's hunters attack in order to free various supervillains, including Mr. Negative, which is the man who killed Miles' father. There is actually a nice moment during this mission that has Miles debate leaving Mr. Negative to drown instead of saving him, and it sets up the only good arc in the game of him having to come to terms with not seeking revenge. I like that stuff. I wish it was more fleshed out. It's during this section that Miles is cut by Scorpion, resulting in him being poisoned. The poison amplifies his powers and lets him start shooting out force lightning.
What?
I really honestly have no idea why his powers suddenly become super strong via this happening. There's nothing else, so it has to be that. It might be from the comics, I have no idea, but it just kind of comes out of nowhere that along with the bloated power set he already has compared to Peter, now he is even stronger and has even better versions of these existing powers. Besides the revenge tale with Miles and Mr. Negative, everything else felt so thin and bare bones. Yeah, that even includes Harry, but we'll get to him, I swear. Peter's struggling to pay bills, but gets a job offer within an hour of him losing his last job. Miles can't write the opening passage to a college application. MJ has to write clickbait articles for the Bugle or JJ won't pay her. Rio Morales, which is Miles' mother, has a new boyfriend. These are all these little threads for the two Spider-Men interwoven with the bizarre choices of side activities I already mentioned. Two Spider-Men, sure, half a plot each? Barely.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
Kraven is the main villain of the game, technically. He's the instigator at the very least, and a persistent nuisance. A dying man that wants to go out against someone that's better than him, rather than to his illness. Outside of Kraven having super strength from magic, medicine, I'm not sure they account for the level of strength and resilience he displays in the game, but whatever. I like Kraven. In fact, Kraven's Last Hunt is one of the few Spider-Man comics I've read that I really enjoyed. It's a sharp contrast to how Kraven views Spider-Man in this game, which I'm mentioning in passing and not as a complaint. In Kraven's Last Hunt, he sets out to prove he is better in every possible way, even including crime fighting, than Spider-Man, and upon proving exactly that, he sits in his chair, he sips some wine, and then he blows his brains out for having decided there is nothing left to achieve. In this game, Kraven doesn't even register Spider-Man as of interest, which is a nice, sharp contrast to the kind of personality that I was expecting. Here, Kraven views Spider-Man as beneath him, not worthy of his time, rather than the thing he wants to be better than. I don't think it's explicitly said in the game, but I get the feeling that that's because he knows Spider-Man wouldn't kill him. I like this version of Kraven. He's easily the best character in the game despite the very limited screen time he actually gets. His motive of finding a worthy foe to die to in a city full of metahumans and supervillains is a fun angle. I don't really think he'd have had a chance against a building-sized Sandman or a super mutated lizard, but whatever. He's not looking to win, he just wants to die in style. Once the symbiote starts appearing, only then does his interest change towards Peter. In interviews, the team were asked about the many off-screen, and one on-screen, deaths Peter's rogues gallery faces at Kraven's hands. The gist of it is that they wanted to show that Kraven is really the world's greatest hunter by having him kill these people. We see him murder Scorpion on screen, but the other deaths, such as Vulture and Electro, I think, they're only heard about briefly. I agree that he's a great character, but he deserved more screen time. Show him killing these villains. It would have been a good way to incorporate the pointless side activities if, say, after or during one of them, you see or hear a news report about one of the villains being found dead. It's important to interconnect these types of things to give the illusion of it all being part of the main plot. It would have made it seem like these ultimately pointless moments had some kind of importance. There isn't much else to say about Kraven. I enjoyed his brief appearances in the game, and in general the direction they took him was refreshing. I wish he were around more rather than just endless waves of his hunters that he can somehow afford to pay for. His eventual death at the hands of Venom was also the only standout moment in the whole game for me, really. It could have been done a little better, but he was still done relatively well.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
The time has come to talk about Harry Osborn and his dreams of healing the world, which is some whipping grade cringe. Having been living in a tube to slow the illness that's been killing him since before the first Spider-Man game was even set, he's been bonded to the Venom symbiote, which has cured his condition. Well, not cured really, since he gets sick again as soon as the symbiote leaves him. Paused its effects, I guess? Either way, he's healthy now, sort of, and wants to run the Emily May Foundation with Peter, which is a company named after their dead family members, and is focused on healing the world by using the science to solve every problem that has ever existed, including ending hunger and creating perpetual energy.
What?
It's just that easy, thanks to the science. Harry exists as a different way for Peter to get the symbiote suit, and creates some additional drama once Peter does get it, because every second he has it brings Harry closer to his death. This version of Harry and the symbiote lifts heavily from the other versions of Venom, Eddie Brock most notably, and also Flash Thompson, along with the original 90s cartoon symbiote arc, and when asked about this, prompted this slightly incoherent response from Artman to IO9. Harry doesn't really feel like a character in the game, he's just a means to multiple ends. He gets the symbiote to Peter and then becomes the ticking clock element that pulls Peter between wanting to keep the suit for himself and saving his best friend. Towards the end of the game, he is a means by which to bring Venom into existence as the main villain, and in the finale is a means for his father Norman Osborn to begin his trip on the crazy train straight to Goblin Town. It did try to have Harry do more, like a couple of missions where he teams up with Peter and he's wearing a suit that references Flash Thompson's Agent Venom persona, but the only thing I took from those missions was that he kept messing up. He almost got returning but now reformed villain Tombstone killed. Was this to show that he doesn't have what it takes to be a hero? Was it to be in stark comparison to how quickly Miles picked up the hero business? I'm not really sure. It isn't given enough time to breathe and for Peter to really team up with Harry over the long term, which could have led to a more believable rift between Peter and Miles, or a genuine hatred between Harry and Miles. Sadly though, as I said, Harry just exists to give away the suit and then later become Venom for the last couple of hours. I did quite enjoy the sequence where Peter gets the suit, when he goes into his first symbiotic rage, as it was the first time I felt like I was playing as someone with superpowers. But it did also suffer from something a game trying too hard to be a movie does frequently.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can.
Ah, the walk and talk. During the section that Peter gets his black suit, Kraven unceremoniously takes Spider-Man out by stabbing him. This leads to MJ, yeah, she's there, we'll get to her, dragging Peter through the compound as he dies. Meanwhile, Harry in a rage is fighting Kraven all around you. This is a very movie moment, and not just because of the high drama. In my Suicide Squad video, I praised the section that has two heroes fighting each other around you while you're doing your own thing. This was because it could have been a perfect point of growth for the characters, and because in general you're still interacting with the game as you normally would. Too many moments in these Spider-Man games are slow, so very slow walking while you watch or listen to things happening. It feels so sluggish. It feels like needless stretching of time. Don't even get me started on the sequences where you have to wander around as a spider bot listening to the random chatter of hired goons. I do actually like the scene where Peter gets the suit, as I think I said, so I'm not specifically shitting on that for what's happening plot-wise, but there are surely more diegetic methods of giving plot to the player while still letting the player play the game. While the section in general could have been better, it's still a far cry from as bad as the pointless missions where you just walk around. Why on earth does the game feel that it's important enough to waste your time spraying graffiti as Miles' girlfriend? Why is a Peter mission him riding an electric bike? I know I went on about it before, but the game has the time to waste your time to an appalling degree, and this even bleeds over into story moments. Anyway, Peter gets his black suit here, so let's move on from that.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can.
If you grew up with the 90s Spider-Man cartoon or saw the third Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie, then you already know how it goes with Peter in his symbiote suit. No goofy dance in this one though. It influences emotions, makes him more aggressive, assertive, and generally a bit of a prick. He starts to care less and less about Harry dying and sees his friends as turning on him. It's fairly standard stuff and certainly nothing new, which is all the more confusing as to why the developers seem to be so proud of this game's plot. I read a comic that I think was called The Spider's Shadow, which deals with the what-if scenario of Peter deciding to keep the symbiote suit. It goes how you might expect, he eventually starts killing people. The original source of the symbiote suit didn't take this more adult approach. Yep, the cartoon was the original source, not a comic. So it might have been nice if this game had done that. How about instead of Kraven killing all those other villains, one was actually killed by Peter, and this gets his attention since normally Spider-Man would never do such a thing. Nah. They refused to have Peter cross that line, even though, as we'll discuss later on, an original version of the script had him killing someone. Miles has already killed someone, so why not? About the only original thoughts the developers had regarding the symbiote is who would eventually become Venom and, later, Anti-Venom, which seems more for gameplay reasons than story. Oh, there is one more thing. They removed one of the symbiote's established weaknesses in other media. Now the symbiote is only weak to loud sounds. Gone is its intense fear of fire. I couldn't find this point being addressed in interviews, they might have just forgot. In the comic I mentioned, the thing that tips Peter over the edge and drives him to kill a villain is that said villain burns Aunt May's house down, and the symbiote won't let Peter go in to save her because of its fear of fire. It shifts the blame to the villain instead of itself. We'll specifically talk about Venom later, so let's wrap up this section talking about the symbiote in general like this. I liked the symbiote rage mode, I liked how the suit changed design as it took more influence over Peter's mind, and it followed story beats I was expecting, fine. I don't even mind that Miles has to beat sense into Peter to get him to remove the suit eventually. You don't mess with a Sith Lord. Speaking of Sith Lords, let's talk about the true villain of the piece.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
In the first Spider-Man game, the worst sections by far were the slow walking and sometimes forced stealth sections where you played as Miles, but mostly played as MJ. Have you ever been curious what Insomniac thought about the feedback regarding these MJ missions was in particular? I hope so, because I have the answer. We had two choices, Intihar said. We could say, alright, we'll make it easy and just not do it, and everybody would go, great, no more MJ missions. Or we could say, hey, we've talked about showing the world from all different angles. We're going to make her moments better. We're going to take on the challenge. We're going to make people like playing as her. He goes on to say, and if she's a little OP, I don't give a shit. She's fine. I don't care. A surprisingly aggressive tone there. But if she truly offers up a different angle that builds on the story, then surely everyone would be happy. Well, yeah, wait, no, probably not. This is the internet. But it would have helped if they'd done anything other than what they did. MJ missions, of which I believe there are 3 in Spider-Man 2, see her now a martial arts expert thanks to training with Silver Sable and armed with a super web taser gun of some kind that takes down any enemy in 1 to 2 hits. This does not make her sections any better, and I'm very confused why he thinks it would. They are still a chore to play, they slow the pace down far too much, with possibly one exception where MJ is stalked by the symbiote through an underground tunnel at night, which wasn't bad. They defy the game's internal logic. If such a powerful web taser exists, why the hell doesn't Peter, or especially Miles with his electric powers, use anything like that? The game establishes that they have 3D printers built into their web shooters now, so it wouldn't be that hard. It seems safer for both parties than punching someone unconscious. These sections feel like what they are, forcing an unnecessary character into the forefront of a plot that doesn't directly involve her for no apparent reason. It should not be easier for MJ to take out dozens of Kraven's Hunters than it is for Miles or Peter. I don't play a Spider-Man game to play as a normal person with a gun, and I also don't play it to be bored. MJ's sections are not interesting, they offer nothing of worth and could have been done better with Peter or Miles. Since it's apropos, I will mention here that the downgrade in her face model, which looks nothing like her motion capture model, is bizarre. Peter got the same treatment though to turn him into off-brand Tom Holland, so it isn't exactly an isolated incident. Still not great to look at, though. By far the worst, the absolute worst moment involving MJ is a section where you're playing as Peter. Venom is out in the world and decides to infect her with a symbiote of her own, and so she becomes Scream. This is an established character from the comics, but here it serves as nothing more than a writer's self-insert to rage at men. A ridiculously long boss fight against MJ as Scream begins. I think it had 4 damn phases. While playing the game, I didn't really focus on what MJ and Peter were saying to each other since I was focused on being the boss fight. Only when I went back did I see how terrible it truly was. It can safely be summed up as MJ bitching at and berating Peter for everything that's wrong with her life. This is very in keeping with the MJ of the Sam Raimi movies, but it's still pretty terrible and awful to see here. Peter grovels and promises to be a better boyfriend as she bitches at him about how he cares too much about being Spider-Man, how poorly her book sold. The so-called advanced writer of the game has written many books, as a side note. How she's done begging for validation, how it's about her for once and not him. She unironically says at one point in the fight, "I live in your shadow where my dreams turn to dust." The hilarious thing is that through this whole conversation with Peter talking about how very important MJ is to the world and how much of a pathetic tiny man he is compared to her greatness, you're beating the absolute shit out of her in an overly long boss fight. Why does the symbiote instantly turn her evil anyway? Oh well, no time for that, just gotta shout at Peter some more. MJ is just the worst, and her feelings expressed here as a barely disguised self-insert cannot only be excused by her being infected by the symbiote. It heightens emotions, it doesn't create them. There's one last thing I want to mention about MJ, but it happens at the very, very end of the game, so we'll need to come back to it later on. I think it's important to mention though, that after this section, in which she defeats Peter, but he convinces her to free herself from the symbiote, she calls JJ and tells him she won't be making any more clickbait articles for the Bugle and quits her job, seconds after shouting at Peter, for not being able to hold down a job. Let's cover Venom now, since he's meant to be the main attraction, I think.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
Kraven rightfully takes up a lot of the game, even if you don't actually see him on camera, but by the time Peter rips the symbiote from himself and returns to Oscorp in order to destroy it, side note, is that considered killing someone? There's barely any game left. Harry, now near death, meets Peter there and somehow manages to smack the container holding the symbiote out of Peter's hands with his walking stick. Plot contrivance 101. The symbiote reunites with Harry, but in Harry's weakened state his persona is almost entirely melded with the now revealed Venom. I like this take on Venom. He looks great, and his almost fully taking over Harry's persona by fusing it with his own due to the weakened state Harry's body's in works really well. It's a nice spin on Venom. I'll give them compliments where they're due. The section where you get to cut loose playing as Venom as he smashes through Oscorp to escape and culminating in a boss fight against Kraven, in which the Hunter is successfully hunted, was really fun. It was the only other moment I felt like I was playing as someone with superpowers. You felt the weight of his movements, you felt the ferocity of his strikes, and the brutal manner he kills Kraven, by biting his head off, is very fitting. It's all so brief though, much like this part's going to be. The game wasted so much time with pointless activities and a meandering plot that it cuts through Venom's arc like butter. The voice actor for Venom, Tony Todd, mentioned that about 10% of what he recorded for the role made it into the final cut. Venom escapes Oscorp, he turns MJ into Scream, and then, oh then, comes the endgame.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
As much as I said I like Venom, I don't like where the story decides to go with him. In order to heal the world, Venom convinces Harry that everyone in the city needs to be turned into a symbiote and pulled into the hive mind or consciousness that they all share. Best friends forever and all that. The city's covered in black tendrils that Venom can somehow make once he finds his meteor, and spreads over miles, and any normal citizens are turned into symbiote creatures, which are really annoying to fight, by the way. I mentioned a long time ago now that Miles coming to terms with wanting revenge on Mr. Negative completes his character arc, and this culminates here with both of them travelling inside Peter's subconscious, don't ask how, to remove the lingering influence of the symbiote that's still in him, and in doing so turns Peter into anti-Venom.
What?
This version of anti-Venom doesn't really work like he works in the comics, it's just an excuse to let Peter keep his symbiote powers without actually having the symbiote. They also don't seem as effective against the symbiote as the game would try to make you believe. Venom still beats Peter's ass for most of the game, and it falls on Miles to be the one to do most of the work against Venom, which was certainly a choice. Sorry, getting sidetracked again. Insomniac was a victim to a large hack which exposed a lot of their internal data, including earlier scripts and drafts for the plot to Spider-Man 2, as well as plans for future tie-in games. The original idea for the finale to this game had Venom attempting to open a portal to the Clintar homeworld he's from to let his dying people through onto Earth, and in order to stop him, Peter would have been forced to kill Harry. Crossing the line Peter has yet to cross, and it being the final straw that causes him to give up being Spider-Man, would have been the perfect, albeit sad, way to draw a close on his time as being the main character. He saves the city one last time, but at a great cost, and makes him give it all up. The way to do it was right there, and they messed it up. I guess they didn't want Peter to be a murderer, even though Miles already is. But hey, I guess putting Harry in a permanent coma is so much better. Instead of the idea they should have gone with, they have gone with heal the world via being in a hive mind. This culminates in Peter, MJ and Miles fighting a terrible looking winged Venom, which is apparently from a comic, but that doesn't change the fact that it looks dumb as hell, with Peter's anti-Venom powers only coming into play at the very end after the boss fight to purge the symbiote entirely. Oh wait, I forgot, Harry actually does die here. His heart stops after Peter purges the symbiote, but Miles restarts it with his Sith Lord powers, which isn't how it works in real life, yes I know, but they're using movie logic. So I guess he is still a killer in a manner of speaking, but gets to walk away largely guilt-free since Harry doesn't stay dead? The ending kinda sucks, and the Venom boss fight is way too long, with way too many phases and way too many enemies swarming you, good grief. Parts of the exchanges and dialogue between Peter and Harry / Venom, however you want to look at it, they were okay, but that's honestly about it. It rushes to an apocalyptic catastrophe that needs to be stopped and solves it all within an hour.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
With Harry in a coma and his father Norman being an angry little goblin and waiting, it comes to the actual end of the game. I think I might be right in saying that most people despise how this game handles the final scenes, but who knows. Peter decides that the mature, responsible thing to do is give up his life as a superhero as he approaches the ancient, decrepit age of 30 to let a young kid like Miles, about to go to college, risk his life daily instead. So he can start a business out of his garage, and MJ can start a fucking podcast called The New Normal.
You serious?
It made my skin crawl. It truly did. Over the last half hour, I've talked about how these events have changed me. MJ mutters into her webcam before publishing her unedited raw audio to the internet. She sighs, closes her laptop, and gets up from her desk brimming with smug satisfaction, knowing that her day's work is finally done. Thank goodness Peter gave up being a hero for this. I can't believe they thought this was a satisfying conclusion to the game. It boggles the mind. It's wrong on so many levels. It makes Peter look bad, it makes MJ look worse, and leaves everything on Miles. Can you imagine the roles reversed? Peter has been Spider-Man since he was younger than Miles, but can you imagine him having an older mentor that's just like, yeah, you know, you've got it, you're fine, you're doing great, I'm just going to sit this out now. This was partially addressed by Insomniac, so if you'd like to read their justification for this, feel free to pause now. It isn't a good enough reasoning to warrant such horrendous character assassination. The game does leave off with a post-credits appearance by Silk, so perhaps they plan to make her and Miles be the focus of the next game. I doubt they'd have Silk and Peter, since the one comic I read with the two of them has Peter mentioned that they can't be around each other very long because they have the irresistible urge to have sex. The game does also set up Carnage, and despite him seemingly dying, Insomniac does have a Venom game planned as well. They're doing the Sony thing of going all in on Spider-Man, but not Peter Parker Spider-Man. Wonder if it will work out for them as well as it did for Sony. Anyone seen Madam Web?
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
Well, we made it to the end, so I have to ask you one last time, who is this game for? What answer did you come up with now that I've gone through the major story beats, characters, and decisions made during the game's creation? Was it the same conclusion as mine? Feel free to comment first before listening on, and let's see together. The conclusion I came up with is that this game is the epitome of virtue signalling and exists as the means by which some creatives within the developers chose to expound said signalling. There is a Spider-Man game in there, such as it is, a game with combat I didn't care for, decent web swinging, and some other small highs. It's there somewhere, but it's lost behind the messages being pushed by people who should know better. Their paper-thin beliefs that fold as soon as money is at risk speaks volumes louder than the incessant preaching present throughout. The lazy social and environmental preaching from a position of privilege is very apparent, and I don't really want to go back over Mary Jane's self-insert vibes. Overall, I didn't really enjoy Spider-Man 2. Has that been obvious? I can't say I hated it though. It's still probably better than the Miles Morales standalone game, speaking purely from gameplay, but the stories of both are certainly comparably terrible and also had the same writer. If you don't mind Peter being shoved out the door, there's still some exciting moments and a cinematic feel here, but I'd recommend playing Spider-Man 1 instead of Spider-Man 2. And with that, I think I'm done talking about this game. I really am. If you made it to the end, thank you. I hope I put my points across. I certainly tried. Feel free to comment what you thought and whether or not you'd like to see similar critiques from me in the future. You could even suggest some specific games to look at if you want. Thank you for listening either way though, and until next time, ta-ta for now.